go all out. Going back again to what I was saying, you need to solve the client's problem at all times. If they need an answer on this topic, you need to provide an answer. You can't sort of go off into like ancillary matters and provide like a beautiful essay on something that looks related but doesn't help the client.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Student Lawyer podcast series. Whether you're at school, sixth form, university, thinking about a career in law, or exploring law careers, you're in the right place. We are the one-stop shop for student lawyers. If you'd like to join the Student Lawyer as a writer, please email hello@thestudentlawyer.com. Hello everyone, welcome to the Student Lawyer podcast. My name is Stephanie. I'm a future trainee solicitor and currently completing SQE Plus at the University of Law. Joining me today is Madeleine Webber, Chartered Legal Executive, English solicitor, New York attorney, and a certified information privacy professional, and founder of INHOUSEW, an educational platform with focused materials to help you smash your preparation for the CIPPE, CIPM and SQE2 exams. During the episode, Madeleine talks about how INHOUSEW's resources equip SQE2 students with the knowledge and skills to take the exams. Madeleine also shares her invaluable advice on how best to prepare for and pass SQE2. Maddie, welcome to the Student Lawyer. It's wonderful to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here.
So why don't we kick off the interview by, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about your journey to becoming commercial counsel at SiteTracker and also founder of INHOUSEW?
Yeah, of course. So, some of you might know me already as Maddie, or otherwise known as INHOUSEW on Instagram and TikTok. So, to give a bit of background on my journey, I did an LLB at Cardiff University almost 11 years ago. I started, so quite some time. And during my undergraduate law degree, I did the done thing. I applied for training contracts over and over again, and I got rejected over and over again. And I really struggled. I really wanted to become a solicitor. I knew that was what I wanted to do because I had done some sort of informal work experience, and it just seemed like the right career for me. But I just didn't appreciate how challenging it was to get a training contract. So after I finished my LLB, I didn't have a job lined up, so I felt like a complete failure. And I got a scholarship, however, to do an LLM. So I just thought to myself, right, I've got nothing else to do. I might as well do that. So I did my LLM, and during my LLM, I applied again for training contracts. And again, I didn't get anywhere. And I reached a point where I just thought, I just don't know what I'm doing wrong here. I'm not sort of getting consistent feedback as to what I need to change or how I need to go about this differently. So at that point, I was like, okay, I'm going to leave like the law firms be, and I'm going to see what else there is out there. And I had a job board at my university, so like an online job board. And I literally applied for everything that was on there. Like, in total honesty, I didn't really distinguish too much at that point because I just wanted to get experience. And as luck would have it, one of the roles listed there was an in-house internship with a company called GE Aviation. So that was the first time I knew that in-house existed. So for those of you who might not have come across in-house lawyers before, a lot of companies have in-house legal departments, so they have a lawyer or a legal professional working solely for that company. So rather than being in a law firm where you have several clients, as an in-house lawyer, your only client is the company that's employing you. So I knew that existed. What I didn't know was that it was possible for graduates to work in in-house departments. So I found an in-house internship and I interviewed, and that was the only thing that I was successful for, coincidentally. But yeah, I hadn't realized, like when I was applying for training contracts, that it is possible for graduates and non-qualified people to work in-house. So I did that internship. I was part of the contracts team. So we looked after drafting and negotiating all contracts. And this was a plane parts business. So this was for the sale of plane parts or for the maintenance of plane parts. It was really interesting. It was, however, only like a temporary internship. It was only 1 year. So during that year, I had that sort of light bulb moment. I was like, oh, actually, I can work in-house. I don't need to necessarily work in a law firm to be a lawyer. So at that point, I really focused on applying for in-house opportunities. And I was very fortunate. I landed a permanent role as a contracts manager. So in-house, very often non-qualified legal professionals that are part of the legal team are called contracts managers. So I landed a role in a software company in their legal team, and they were willing to help me with qualification. It wasn't possible to do a traditional training contract. They said I could do SILEX, so to become a chartered legal executive, which again, for any of you who are not familiar with the distinction, a chartered legal executive is a lawyer who's qualified only to practice in a certain area, whilst a solicitor is qualified to practice in all areas. So they said they can do SILEX, but not a solicitor route, which I thought to myself, okay, it's not brilliant, but it's something. So I started on SILEX. I did become a chartered legal executive, but I also wanted to qualify as a solicitor. And after lots of like back and forth and looking at different routes, it is actually possible to cross qualify from a chartered legal executive to a solicitor by doing the LPC and PSC. However, sorry, this is getting a bit complicated, but I actually decided to pursue a different route whereby I qualified abroad. So I qualified in New York and then I cross qualified into England and Wales so I started under the old system called Qualified Lawyer Transfer Scheme, but I finished under the new system with SQE2. So I was studying, was working full time, I was doing SILEX, New York Bar, and the English solicitor qualifications. And I finally dual qualified in 2022 after much back and forth and a lot of delays due to COVID and the SRA being uncooperative. But I got there in the end. And I really enjoy working in-house. So I changed jobs since then, but I'm still working in software and I'm currently a sole legal counsel for EMEA, Europe, Middle East, and Africa for SiteTracker, who are also a software company. I report to the general counsel and I look after pretty much all legal matters that SiteTracker has to deal with within EMEA. So that's my sort of lengthy career journey into becoming an in-house lawyer at SiteTracker.
I think that before you go on and speak about INHOUSEW, I think that's fantastic. It's such a inspiring career journey, and I know that you said when you were doing your LLB 11 years ago, you were a bit disheartened about not having a job lined up. But looking back now, would you have done it any other way than the way that it actually panned out for you? Because it sounds to me like you built up so much experience doing different things and you have all this, well, it's just opened your eyes to different opportunities and you've really been able to carve out this fantastic career for yourself. So well-rounded, such a well-rounded lawyer with all these qualifications and experiences. I mean, if I were to put my feet in your shoes, I don't think that I would want it any other way. So yeah, what's your take on that?
Oh, thank you. No, I really appreciate that. It's very kind. And I do get asked this question quite a lot, like if I could do it all over again, would I do it this way? And it's a tough question. I think weirdly enough, I think not having done a training contract has actually really helped me. This might sound really counterintuitive, but by virtue of the fact that I was working as an in-house legal professional throughout sort of my qualification journey, I have more experience than a traditionally qualified lawyer. And also the fact that I am New York qualified. And that wasn't part of my plan, but it's really served me really well because most software companies are American, and a lot of the hiring process stems from, American managers, and they have no idea. Like most American lawyers don't have a clue about SQE and English like qualifications, etc., but they do know about the New York bar. So I have found that I do have a distinct advantage being New York qualified. Like people get quite excited about that. And yeah, like I mentioned, because I just have so much experience, given my age and where I am like more senior than I think what I would have been had I gone through the more traditional route. So yeah, like I mentioned, I never thought I would be in this position. I report to the general counsel, like between me and the CAO, there's one layer. I didn't think I would be at this point at 29. So I do think, the traditional route has its own merits, but I think what's really lacking in a lot of universities, I found that as well, like there isn't enough information about alternative routes and enough reassurance that going for an alternative route actually can provide a lot of benefits. So that is, one of the reasons why I like doing these like podcast interviews and also like sharing about in-house like legal routes on my social media.
Yeah. So, along your journey, what made you decide to create and launch In-house W?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, like there's just not enough information about working in-house. So I started In-house W on Instagram in 2020, I think. Yeah, so quite a while ago now. And I just wanted to like create a platform to show people like, oh, if you don't get a training contract, it's not the end of the world. Like there's other options. Because like for me, it felt like the end of the world. And I just wanted like to be sort of, that reassuring presence for some people who find themselves in that situation that it's not the end of the world. There's other things to look into. And I also wanted to document sort of my studying journey, like for all the different qualifications I was doing. So I was doing the New York Bar, SILEX, and then afterwards QLTS and SQE. And I was also doing privacy certifications, the CIPP and the CIPM. And I just wanted to share sort of like tips around that because, again, I know a lot of people, especially now with SQE, they study part-time whilst working full-time, which is super tough. And I do think like a lot of managers and senior people who might not have gone through that sort of way of studying don't quite appreciate what that means. So again, I just wanted to like have that platform and share my experience and sort of share tips and also just connect with people who are in similar situations.
Yeah. So what exactly is In-house W and who is it for?
No, it's a great question. So in-house W, it's sort of evolved into several things. It started off as just like a social media platform. It still is. I still share like content about life as an in-house lawyer. I share study tips for privacy certifications and also the SQE. But over time, after I finished all of my studies, it really bugged me that there isn't as much choice and there isn't as many resources as there should be, particularly for the SQE2. When I was studying for the SQE2, I did it with a prep course provider, and they just provide you with like an avalanche of materials. And I just, this is what I meant earlier, like people don't appreciate when you work full time, when, you're in a busy legal team, you're reading, you're working, you're on the phone all day. In the evening, the last thing you want to do is read a textbook. And I feel like a lot of providers, they don't appreciate that. So I felt like there's a huge gap for concise materials that are easily digestible at the end of a long day when your brain is fried. So I saw there was a big gap as to with that. So I started creating materials for the CIPP, the CIPM, and the SQ2. And basically, over time that has sort of grown and grown and grown where I've created sort of courses. I sort of I'm reluctant to call them prep courses because they are much shorter than like the traditional larger prep courses from bigger providers, but they are sort of, you know, packages that contain revision aids that help people study for the privacy certification, CIPP and CIPM, and the SQE2 as effectively and efficiently as possible. So, yeah, In-House W now is two things. It's an informative social media platform, but it's also a online course provider. And my sort of key audience, I would say, are, you know, obviously like law students and legal professionals who want to pass these exams. But I also, you know, I talk to career changers. So anyone who's like, you know, interested in in-house law and looking to gain support in passing these exams.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that. So because in-house W offers so much, but law students these days are predominantly taking the SQE route now. Would you mind telling us or explaining what the in-house SQE2 course consists of?
Yeah, of course. So I have a range of materials that can be bought in different constellations. That is one thing that I sort of emphasize a lot is that I only want people to get what they feel like they need. But my largest course, my largest SQ2 course package is called SQ2 Preparation Advantage Plus. And that contains outlines, so covering the functioning legal knowledge in a summarized bullet point format. And this is something which I think a lot of prep course providers, they kind of miss out on somewhat. They don't, you know, have just like a summary of the FLK of what you need to know in an easily accessible format that you can just revise with quickly. So that's one part. Then mock exams. So mock exams that you can practice with yourself that include suggested answers. At the moment, the largest package contains 44 individual mock assessments, but I am looking, like I try to keep adding to that. So it's on the rise. Then it also contains videos just running through like the FLK in a summarized format. So like mini lectures basically. Then it also contains like overviews, like brief overviews, how to approach each assessment of the SQ2, again, both in like PDF and video format. And then I also, in that package, provide personalized feedback on 2 oral mocks and 2 written mocks. So I would do 2 live oral mocks with, you know, the student in question and then provide feedback on that. And then equally with the written mocks, a student would send me 2 written mocks of their choice. I review that, provide feedback, and we have a call about it and go through it. So that's the largest package. But like I said, flexibility is something that I take huge pride in. So you can buy everything I've sort of mentioned, or almost everything I mentioned individually as well. Like you could buy just the outlines, or you could buy just an outline in a subject, or you can buy just the feedback. So that's something that I really feel like is missing in the SQ2 prep market, is you can either buy a huge course or you can't buy anything at all. And that's sort of where I come in. I sort of provide like, you know, what you need, what you feel like you need, and you can just go with that. Or you can go with the whole package if you feel like that's what you need.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I must now take this opportunity to really big up the your SQE2 course because I am an SQE2 student. I'm now doing SQE plus. I've just taken my SQE2 exams, and although I go to ULaw and have in-person workshops every week, which are extremely helpful, the sheer volume of reading I have to do and the length of the workshops, it does make it difficult to, well, first of all, just get through the reading because there's tons of it. But then secondly, to make a nice set of easily readable, concise notes, which I mean, I don't, if anybody else is like me, when they're taking notes in class, you know, you come back to it and it doesn't really make sense. So using your platform and having those outlines there was such a great help because I was able to really just get through the reading without thinking, oh, I need to stop and start taking notes and being distracted in class from really listening and hearing the teacher in order to take notes. So that was a really good uh, resource for me. You set the notes out, the outlines out so well, and they're so easily readable, and they're so detailed as well. And you put stuff in those notes and outlines that they don't actually have in the book sometimes. I think that you are super quick on updating them. So yeah, that's really helpful. And in terms of the mock exams that you do, now, again, I'm very fortunate because I did doing a prep course, and we do workshops where we do essentially mocks, exercises of the skills that we'll be examined on. But there's only a certain amount that they can produce. So when it comes to revision time, you're a bit like, well, I've done all these exercises now from class. What else can I practice on? So whilst, FLK knowledge is super important, I think, for passing SQE2, because, you can have the skills down, but if you don't know what the law is, then, that's 50% of the marks. You still do need to practice these skills and have new things to practice on. So again, having access to your platform and having that additional resources with the mocks, that was again really helpful. And I have to say, I don't think that I would have attended the exam and felt as quite prepared if I didn't do your course. So I just have to big it up, and yeah, highly recommend it to anybody who is doing SQE, even if you are going to a provider, because it's a bit of like a layering thing, isn't it? You want to take a bit of this and a bit of that and just see what really works for you. So yeah, on behalf of all the SQE2 students, I just want to thank you, Maddie, for helping us out.
No, my pleasure. And yeah, I mean, I'm really passionate about this. Like, I love doing this so much. And no, absolutely, you hit the nail on the head. Like, it is a bit of a layering exercise where, the courses, the big prep courses, they are very good to provide like the foundations. And I always say to people, like, my materials, they don't go into like the nth degree on every single topic, but they give you sort of a summary of everything. And yes, I agree. Like, I noticed that as well. When I was preparing with a larger prep course provider, there were things in the materials that were missing, like things on the FLK that weren't in their materials, because I feel like a lot of prep course providers, they have a syllabus, but it's more sort of general and what they think is part of the exam rather than actually following the FLK to a T. And there were a few like topics on the FLK that I didn't know about because it wasn't really covered in my course. And that's again, one thing I'm very sort of passionate on is like just sharing the message that you need to stick to the FLK, because to be fair to the SRA, they've listed all the topics that can come up. And yeah, that is where my outlines come in. Like they literally, like, I copy and pasted the FLK and completed it basically. So chances of you missing something are almost zero.
Yeah, and of course, it's not just the FLK that you do as well. You also provide the outlines on the academic law, which is incredibly helpful because, I mean, I didn't know that SQE was going to be in place when I finished my law degree. So I think after my last exam, I tore up. Thank God, I'm never going to need this again. Boy, was I wrong.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, the academic law, again, that is listed in the FLK, and that's it part of my outlines. But yes, a lot of prep course providers, they don't cover those like black letter law subjects like tort or trust, etc. So again, I always say to people, don't just sort of, study in sort of this vacuum with just your provider. Do look at like other like people as well who've done the SQ2, like get sort of their advice, but also look at other resources. Having like a assortment of resources is the best thing to do for the SQ2.
I'd like to take a moment to speak about the University of Law, which is the university I decided to study my LPC at. The University of Law is the sponsor of this podcast and makes it possible for us to continue bringing these episodes to you. So we really appreciate you supporting us by supporting our sponsors. What really sets the University of Law apart from other universities is its belief in training students for the real world from the moment they accept a place. The University of Law's experienced career career service and award-winning pro bono clinics offer students the chance to get real-life legal experience which can boost employability. They offer a range of undergraduate and postgraduate legal training and master's degrees designed by qualified experts to help students excel at any stage of their career. Their courses are employment-focused, honing key skills in a teaching environment based on real legal practice. Part-time and online study options are also available on many of their courses to help students work and study at the same time. If you'd like to find out more about the courses on offer, please click the link in the description box of the podcast.
So what, in your opinion, is the best revision technique for SQE2?
No, great question. I mean, when I was doing the SQE2, my go-to revision techniques were two things really. So firstly, active recall revision. So I had my notes, which were basically the forerunners of the outlines that I now make available. I had my notes in front of me. I would review 5 to 10 pages, and then I'd turn the pages sort of face down, and then I'd talk myself through what I just read. And anything I'd missed, I'd sort of go over again until I could sort of repeat what I'd just gone through without looking at my notes. I did that, pretty much from the start and very sort of consistently and regularly to have that sort of memorization process. The other thing I often did, this might sound a little bit strange, but the other thing that really helped me was I would explain like the functioning legal knowledge, or like the law that I had learned from my active recall revision. I would explain that to my family members, so my husband or my mum, because I was conscious that on the SQE2 you have to provide client-focused advice. So the best way to do that is to like explain it really clearly so anyone can understand. So that sort of clarity feature I tested on my family, and whenever I explained something to them and they would give me sort of blank stare back, I knew, okay, I can't explain it this way on the SQE2 because the client ain't going to understand what it means and I'm going to lose marks there. So refining that sort of explanation process, and then as soon as I explain it in a certain way and my family members would look at me like, oh yeah, no, that makes sense, then I knew, okay, this is how I'd have to explain it. And I do think that's so important on the SQE2 to explain things in such a way that anyone can understand. I do think, as legal sort of professionals, or as studying lawyers, we do get into that mindset where like, oh, the person who's marking my exam, they're going to understand what I'm saying because like they know. But with the SQE2, it's not like that. They want to be able to see that you can explain something to someone, like a client in the real world, a layman who has no clue about law. They want to be able to see that you can explain concepts to them very easily and so that anyone could understand. So yeah, those were my two favorite revision techniques, which served me well and I think helped me pass the SQE2.
I really like the active recall revision technique. It's not something that I really had to do before doing SQE2 because didn't really need it for my LLB because a lot of my assessments were essays, and then SQE1 was that multiple choice single best answer. So when it came to SQE2, kind of fell in love with it a little bit, especially the talking it out, because when I first started doing the revision for SQE2, what I was doing was writing out. And I thought that this was a better approach for me rather than talking at the beginning, which it may have been that little bit of writing before speaking it out. But I found that it was taking up a lot more time. It takes 10 times longer to write a sentence out than it is to say it. So in hindsight, I probably would have skipped the writing lines and gone straight for the speaking, but I was probably just taken back to my days in secondary school where I was in detention writing out lines and it just felt natural to me. But yeah, highly recommend the speaking, the tests and FLK knowledge rather than writing it out. Also saves your fingers and wrist joints, everybody. So yeah, do as Maddie says, not as I do. And how about your top tips for anybody who was looking to fail the SQE? What would you really advise not doing? that question make sense?
No, absolutely. Yeah. No, yeah. It's a tough question. So yeah, I'm gonna like answer that in sort of two parts. So firstly, talking about why I think some people don't pass the SQ2, and then I'll talk about sort of if you haven't passed the SQ2, sort of how to approach that. So yeah, starting off with the first part. So I do speak a lot to people who get disappointing news about the SQ2. And in my experience, and obviously just in my opinion, most of the time there's sort of one or several reasons causing a sort of not pass result. The most common reason, the most likely reason, there wasn't enough legal knowledge there. So most like not passing SQ2 results that I look at, because a lot of people do send me their results to like get advice how to improve for next time. Most of the time the skills are okay, like they're on the passing side. It's the law that lets them down. And I think one reason for that is because the SQ2 is sort of falsely advertised as a skills-based exam. Like I think in a lot of people's minds, and that's also I feel like how the SRA portrays it is SQ1 is about the law, SQ2 is about the skills. But that's not true, not at all, unfortunately. The SQ2 is very much a legal knowledge exam because all the questions are phrased as legal knowledge, like legal knowledge questions, like, they're not any questions which, you could purely answer based on skill. You need to know the law and you need to know it well. And going back to what we said about active recall revision, that needs to be like a fundamental part of SQ2 revision. You really need to revise the law as much as you can. So you do know the majority of the FLK because that's what you're going to have to put in your answer. So that's often a reason. Another reason that I see with people is they haven't practiced enough mocks. I have spoken to people who, they attempt the exam, and when you like ask them, oh, how many mocks did you practice? And it's a handful because perhaps they were self-studying, or again, they sort of thought, oh, like, it's skills based, like I have the skills because I work as a legal professional already. Again, like you need to practice as many mocks as you can get your hands on. I appreciate that is tricky, and one of the reasons why I've created sort of mock exams packages so that you get more opportunity to practice, but you do need to practice each assessment at least several times to just get into that flow, to get into like, that sort of habit of knowing how to approach each one. And then the other reason I sort of see, or I think, can cause people not to pass. I mean, it's a little bit, I guess, trickier, but I think often people, when they see a question, they sort of think, oh, I think I know this. And they sort of, they go off on a tangent and they sort of talk about everything about that topic that seems related, that they think, is going to get the marks. But SQ2 is very, it's brutal. Like if your answer doesn't solve the client's problem, or if your answer doesn't tell the client what they need to do or what they need to consider, you're gonna like score really lowly. And I have had that often with people who were really amazed that they didn't pass, saying like, oh, but I put all this law in, I put all these explanations in, how do I get like ones or zeros in the law? And that's most likely the reason is that, yes, you put in correct law, but it wasn't tied to the client's needs. It didn't solve the client's issue. Like I see that quite often. So I would say those are like the three main things. Of course, there can be other reasons as well. Like, you might be having a bad day, or it might just be that one topic that you didn't revise comes up. But generally, I would say those are like the three key things. So in terms of like how to sort of, what steps to take if you haven't passed the SQ2, I mean, I always say to people like, oh, take time to process because it is a bummer. It is, it's going to like, destroy all your qualification plans. And it is, it's a big thing and you'll need time to like just emotionally process that. So definitely do that. Then after you've kind of, gotten over it to an extent, you need to kind of think what you want to do next because you can definitely still qualify. It's just how and when. I have spoken to a lot of people who, they didn't pass the SQ2 and then started looking into alternative routes to qualifying, and I know people who, they found that it's actually going to be quicker for them to go down the SILEX equivalent means route, for example, which is available to people who I think accepted a place to study the LPC by 2021, so that come under the transitional requirements. So there's like other routes. So if that applies to you, if there's like other ways for you to qualify, that might be the better option, because SQ2 is very expensive. You have to, pay the entire fee again. So some people go down sort of an alternative route. If that doesn't apply to you, if SQ2 is pretty much the only way for you to qualify, then you need to really analyze your results, and you need to understand where you went wrong and why. You need to try and like think back to the exam and try and sort of remember what you put, what the questions were and what answers you put, and really try and like, I guess, reverse engineer like what was missing, why didn't I get this right? And then you need to make a plan to focus on these weaknesses. Like I mentioned before, I think for most people, it's the FLK that was the reason, like not having enough FLK knowledge. And, for most people, like their sort of resit SQ2 revision plan focuses on FLK. But of course, if there was another reason for you, like if there was a particular subject or a particular skill, then you need to sort of focus on that. And in terms of timings, I also say to people, because sort of between results and the next available SQ2 session, like for example, now like results just came out for the summer session, the next SQ2 is in January. I would say that's a bit too fast. I always say like don't take the next one, take the one after. So if it were sort of talking about now, that would be April. But of course, it's up to you. But I would sort of leave at least 3 months until the next sort of attempt. But yeah,
that's really helpful advice. Just going back to your advice on what to do in order to pass. You mentioned practicing in one of your points. I just think that practicing the skills after getting your FLK knowledge down to a T is so important. So you're familiar, as you were saying, like with what you're expected to do. Speaking from experience, like it's the timing is tight. So not only have you got to get the skills down, but you've got to do it in like a short period of time, and that is often like very, very difficult to do, especially when you have to read the question a couple of times to make sure you're in fact answering the question. I always like to think in these kind of situations, if I was preparing for example, a dressage show, like on a horse, that I'd never done before, how would I like to practice? And it would definitely be getting on a horse and practicing, rather than just reading out the book and then jumping on the horse and going into a competition. So yeah, I am with you on that. Practice after getting the FLK down. But in terms of like passing the SQE2, what are your top tips for the day?
Top tips for the actual examination, I think is super important. You already alluded to it, is timings. So be super strict with timings. I sort of knew from the outset, so I knew beforehand, I knew exactly what I would be doing at each point of each assessment. So for example, with legal writing, you have 30 minutes. I knew I was going to spend 5 minutes reading the instructions, planning my answer. Then I would spend 20 minutes writing the body of my answer, and I would sort of literally split sort of the time equally between each question. So if there were 3 questions I needed to address in a legal writing assessment, I would split sort of 20 minutes by 3, and then the last 5 to 10 minutes I would sort of tidy up and then read through. And I was super strict, so I always, as soon as like if I had a 5-minute segment, if that was over, move on to the next sort of thing that I had to do. And I do think that only serves you well. A lot of people time out because they get stuck somewhere or they spend too much time on something. And with SQ2, the key is to have like decent marks for the majority of the assessment. So you have 16 exams overall. You need, like, it's a bit of a numbers game. You need to have, enough passing marks overall. So there's no point like having like an excellent assessment on one hand, but then everything else is sort of like not passing. So yeah, timing is really important. The other thing I always say to people is, in terms of like just approach for each assessment, go all out, do not hold back. I sometimes have seen that with students where they don't fully provide an explanation of the general legal principles. They just provide like an answer, like they provide the advice. So, for example, inheritance tax, I see this all the time, and it's such a huge thing of leaving marks on the table where people they know the principles. They say like, oh, inheritance tax in this case is X pounds, which is correct, but they don't state the general principles that led them to that answer, like the nil rate bands, the inheritance tax rate, the exemptions or reliefs that have been applied. If you don't provide your sort of rationale, your reasoning, it's a bit like a maths exam. They can't give you marks on the law side. So it's really important that for each assessment, you have a mental sort of checklist and say, okay, have I provided all the general legal explanations? Because again, that is, I think, one reason, going back to, why people fail and they don't know why they failed. That is often a reason, is they haven't provided the general law. And the examiners, they can't give you marks for something that's not there. It's just the way it is. So yeah, go all out. Going back again to what I was saying, always solve the client's problem. Don't sort of try and like do an exercise of look how much I know on all these topics. Like, you need to solve the client's problem at all times. If they need an answer on this topic, you need to provide an answer. You can't sort of go off into like ancillary matters and provide like a beautiful essay on something that looks related but doesn't help the client. And the last thing that I really advise people to do, when you see a question where you don't know the answer, like this might sound a little bit strange, but it's very likely this will happen to you because the FLK is just very large, and across 16 assessments, the SRA can get very creative. When you have a question where you don't know the answer, try and make something plausible up. I know that's very counterintuitive for us as legal professionals. We'd rather sort of give advice that we know is correct, but in the SQE2, you have to sort of give it your best shot, because this is the only chance for you to pick up marks. You can't go away, research it, and then give them the answer. So you have to either make up a legal principle that sounds plausible to you, that you think would be the law. And often you'd be surprised how close you get to the real thing and how you can pick up marks. Or you have to come up with like a sensible sort of way of solving it. So for example, I had this on my SQ2, there was a question around tax rates, very specific tax rates, which I had no clue about. And I was like, what do I do here? I can't really make up the tax rate because there's just too many numbers in the decimal system. I am going to get it wrong. But I thought to myself, okay, if I were in the real world, what would I do? And I put together quite a very comprehensive paragraph around, oh, we have to get financial advice, we have to check it with financial advisors and accountants, and we have to come up with the applicable tax liability for this client, blah, blah, blah. And I didn't get sort of great marks, but I got more than 0. And that is the key with SQ2 as well, is that in those situations where you don't know, you come up with something sensible, either made up or like a way of finding out the information you don't know. And that can really sort of be the difference between passing and failing, because often people don't pass by 1% or 2%. And where you pull it out of the bag for those ones where you didn't know, and you sort of pick up 1s and 2s, maybe even 3s, that can make all the difference. So yeah, that is what I recommend you do on exam day.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I just want to say again, thank you for creating such a fantastic initiative. If people, and I highly recommend you do, want to purchase INHOUSEW courses and connect with you on socials, how can they do that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I'm on Instagram and TikTok under INHOUSEW, just one word. And
to hear more of the Student Lawyers podcast, hit the subscribe button and leave us a star rating and review. If you would like to join the Student Lawyer as a writer, please email hello@thestudentlawyer.com.
Just click on the links in the show notes. But I do, again, recommend that if you are wanting to take a break from your SQE to prep and revision and fancy a laugh, then definitely go over to Maddie's Instagram page, because I think that your content is so funny. And yeah, I just don't know how you make the time to do all of this. So yeah, I highly recommend people check out Maddie's Instagram and TikTok page as well. Well, thank you ever so much for joining us on The Student Lawyer. And yeah, thank you again for all of the resources that you provide, and for taking the time to give your advice to our listeners.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed today.
And thank you to everyone for tuning in to another episode of The Student Lawyer, and we'll see you back again here next time.